The air over the Busan harbor was no longer just salt and diesel. It was thick with the electric charge of a city about to tear itself apart. Kaelen, the architect Wu, stood on the deck of the moving boat, his fingers trembling as he held the tablet that had just changed the world. On the screen, the notification was simple, cold, and absolute. Global broadcast complete. Across every major news network, social media platform, and public digital billboard in South Korea, the $5 billion truth was screaming. The minister's shadow regime, his offshore laundries, and the blueprints for the national coup were no longer secrets. They were a public indictment. Kaelen looked back at the receding skyline of Busan, where the distant, rhythmic pulses of blue and red light weren't just sirens anymore. They were the flickering embers of a collapsing empire. The $5 billion he had frozen had finally become the fire he and Sloan intended it to be. Sloan stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the gray fog of the horizon, her silhouette a sharp, unyielding shadow against the pre-dawn light. She didn't look back at the city she had just set ablaze. For her, the uprising wasn't a political victory. It was a tactical shift. The moment that data hit the servers, we stopped being fugitives and started being symbols, Kaelen, she said, her voice a low, steady vibration that cut through the roar of the boat's engine. And symbols are a lot harder to kill than accountants. But don't think for a second that the minister is going to go quietly. A cornered animal with $5 billion in stolen assets is the most dangerous thing on this planet. Kaelen nodded, the weight of the $5 billion drive in his vest feeling lighter now that the burden was shared by millions of citizens. He had moved from a $32,000 contract to a revolution, and the math of his life would never be the same. As they neared a hidden inlet miles up the coast, the boat's radio crackled to life with a frantic, disjointed montage of news reports and emergency broadcasts. Protests are erupting in the Seomyeon district. Military units are refusing orders to disperse crowds. The minister's whereabouts are currently unknown. Kaelen listened, a profound sense of displacement washing over him. He had spent his life managing the invisible flows of wealth, but he had never seen the visceral, human reaction to the numbers he manipulated. This was the uprising, the raw, unscripted consequence of a $5 billion lie. He looked at Sloan, who was now preparing their gear for the landing. She was a woman who lived in the fractures, and she seemed more at home in this chaos than she ever had in the quiet of a safe house. They reached the shore just as the sun began to bleed through the fog, a bruised orange light that highlighted the jagged, rocky coastline. Sloan led him toward a pre-positioned 4x4. Her movement, the drive back toward the outskirts of Busan, was a descent into a nightmare of civil unrest. Smoke from tactical fires drifted across the highway, and the checkpoints were no longer manned by disciplined soldiers, but by confused, angry men in uniform who didn't know who they were taking orders from. Sloan navigated the 4x4 with a reckless, intuitive grace, bypassing the main arteries of the city in favor of the industrial access roads she knew like the back of her hand. The uprising creates noise, she remarked, her eyes never resting on any one object for more than a second. And noise is the best friend a ghost ever had. But remember, architect, in a riot, everyone is a target. Don't look for logic in a crowd that's just realized they've been robbed of $5 billion. They reached a vantage point overlooking the Hyundai district, where the glass towers of the elite stood like silent, fearful sentinels. Below them, the streets were a churning sea of people, their voices a distant, oceanic roar that vibrated in the very chassis of the car. Kaelen saw the digital billboards he had once used for corporate branding, now flashing the minister's private bank account numbers. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent his career as the architect of these very systems, and now he was watching them be used as weapons against his former masters. The $5 billion deal was a noose, and the city was slowly tightening it. Suddenly, a high-pitched electronic whine filled the cabin, the same sound that had preceded the missile lock in the Seomyeon district. "Drone!" Kaelen yelled, pointing toward a sleek, black shape descending from the clouds. Sloan didn't hesitate. She slammed the car into a hard lateral skid, the tires screaming as they gripped the gravel of the overlook. "The minister's private guard," she hissed, drawing her sidearm. "They aren't waiting for a court case. They're going for a total erasure." The drone fired a burst of high-velocity rounds that shattered the rear window, showering Kaelen in glass. Sloane leaned out of the moving car and fired a series of precision shots at the drone's optic sensor, her expression one of detached, professional boredom. The drone swerved, its targeting laser wavering as it struggled to recalibrate. Sloane used the momentary distraction to drive the 4x4 into the mouth of a nearby parking garage, the darkness swallowing them whole. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale exhaust and fear. Sloane killed the engine and looked at Kaelen, her eyes reflecting the dim emergency lighting. The uprising has forced the minister's hand. He's using his personal assets now, men who don't exist on any official ledger. This is the part where the math stops working, Wu. You need to stay focused. We have one shot at reaching the broadcast center in the National Assembly. Kaelen clutched his tablet, the $5 billion data stream still scrolling in the corner of his eye. He realized that the uprising wasn't just about the money, it was about the betrayal of trust. He had been a part of that betrayal for years, a silent accomplice in a suit. But here in the dark of a Busan garage, he was finally choosing a different path. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady for the first time. "The $5 billion is just a number. The truth is what matters now." Sloane nodded, a trace of a grim smile touching her lips. "Then let's go show the minister what a real uprising looks like." As they emerged from the garage on foot, blending into the edges of a massive protest march, Kaelen felt the power of the crowd. It was a chaotic, beautiful, and terrifying force. He saw students, laborers, and office workers standing shoulder to shoulder, united by the revelation of the $5 billion theft. He was the man who had given them the spark, and as he walked beside the legendary operative Sloane, he knew that the architect's legacy was finally something he could be proud of. The uprising was no longer a headline. It was the heartbeat of a city that refused to be silenced. The walk through the riot-torn streets was a gauntlet of sensory overload. Tear gas hung in the air like a bitter mist, and the sound of flashbangs echoed between the skyscrapers like rhythmic thunder. Sloane moved through the chaos with a fluid, haunting grace, her presence a calming anchor for Kaelen amidst the madness. She wasn't fighting the crowd, she was using it, a phantom moving through the noise of the uprising. Kaelen watched as a group of protesters overturned a police van, the vehicle spray-painted with the number 5,000,000 in jagged red letters. The anger was palpable, a living thing that the minister could no longer control with his $5 billion shadow funds. They reached the perimeter of the National Assembly district just as the sun hit its zenith. The area was a fortress, surrounded by double-layered blast walls and manned by the minister's elite private guard, the Wraiths. These weren't the confused soldiers they had seen earlier. These were the men who had been paid $5 billion to ensure the coup succeeded. They stood silent and motionless behind their shields, a black wall of indifference against the surging tide of the uprising. Sloane looked at the line, her eyes narrowing as she calculated the entry point. "This is where the noise stops being our friend, Kaelen. To get inside, we have to break that wall. And once we're in, there's no coming back." Kaelen looked at the $5 billion drive in his hand, then at the thousands of people behind them, shouting for justice. He wasn't just an accountant anymore. He was the key to the lock. He felt a profound sense of clarity. The logic of his old life had been built on fear and greed, but the logic of the uprising was built on something far more powerful, the truth. He turned to Sloane, the ghost of the world who had risked everything for a man she didn't know. "Then let's break it," he said. The architect and the operative stepped forward, two ghosts leading a city toward its final, violent reckoning. The uprising was at the gates, and the $5 billion empire was about to fall. The final push toward the assembly gates was a blur of tactical precision and raw, human energy. Sloane used a series of specialized smoke grenades to create a localized blind spot in the Wraith's thermal sensors, then led Kaelen through a narrow breach in the blast wall that only someone with her knowledge of the city's infrastructure could find. They were inside the perimeter, the sound of the crowd outside becoming a muffled, oceanic roar. The uprising had provided the distraction, but the ghost provided the blade. As they sprinted toward the main entrance of the assembly building, Kaelen felt the sheer weight of the moment. This was the architect's final blueprint, a design drawn in the blood of the streets and the code of a $5 billion secret. The uprising had changed Busan forever, and as they burst through the heavy bronze doors, Kaelen knew that the truth was finally home. Don't miss the reckoning. The Busan lockdown is just the beginning of the end. The minister has turned the city into a cage, but he's forgotten one thing. You can't lock down the truth once it's already out. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss Episode 7, Trading Secrets. The hunt is about to go deeper than ever before as Kaelen and Sloan head into the city's hidden data dens to strike the final blow against the minister's empire. Will they escape the lockdown, or will the $5 billion secret be buried forever in the gutters of Busan? Join the resistance. Subscribe and drop a tag in the comments if you're ready for the next chapter.